Hello, my name is Vivienne Artz and I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Thomson Reuters. I'm also very proud to be the President of Women in Banking and Finance. I'm joined today by David Cruickshank, who is the Global Chair of Deloitte, and we're going to be talking about transforming women's leadership in the law. The 30% Club hardly needs an introduction. It's an amazing organisation that's been around for some time now, and you are one of the founding chairmen. Tell me, what inspired you to join the organisation?
I think two things. I thought that with the team of other chairmen and our leader, Helena Morrissey, that we could make a difference just by speaking to people and encouraging people to take part. So that was the main reason. The second one was more of a personal one. I've always been interested in promoting diversity within our own firm, and to me it was a natural extension of that. And I also thought I'd be able to pick up ideas and things to take back to our own firm, so that was part of it too.
So it was more than just great minds think alike?
Yes, definitely. I think it's looking at diversity generally, it does require men to take leadership, because it's just a fact of life that in most big companies, most big professional services firms, the leadership is still dominated by men, and therefore just on the pure maths, unless men step up and take leadership, we're not going to change the dynamics.
The question I think that you must often get is around that 30% target, and do you think it should be a quota or a target?
I think it should be a target still, because I think that a target with transparency and accountability. So I would marry the two. I think companies should report on where they are, and I think the external reporting does encourage people to change behaviours internally, even if they weren't otherwise doing that. So I think a target with accountability and transparency around it. There's something about quotas to me that sits unnaturally, I think, with certainly in the UK way of doing things, which is more of a sort of comply or explain type environment. But in other countries, they have effected the targets quite successfully, and France, Norway would be two examples of that. And the people who've watched that in action talk very highly of the outputs. I would still prefer us to see progress with targets rather than quotas, but make sure everybody knows that they have to be accountable for improvement.
It's interesting that the target element, I think, has been given a real boost and a real element of credibility when combined with transparency. Otherwise, a target becomes private and you can measure yourself whenever you feel like. And it's interesting to see that the transparency, I think, has really driven the move to achieve a target.
Yeah, nobody wants to be behind the pack.
No, not at all.
In a competitive sense. So that's the targets are out there, and it applies to everything. I mean, it's why transparency and wider reporting for any organisations usually has good outcomes, because it does influence behaviours internally.
How important is a diverse workforce? Is it about fairness? Is it about morale? Is it about bottom line?
I think it's all of those. I would say start with business first. The business need, I would say, why not get the best talent you can get? Whatever the gender, sexual orientation, and other aspects of diversity. If you want to be an organisation that prides itself on having, training, developing the best talent, you're going to cast your net quite wide, because otherwise you're restricting yourself. So that's the first business aspect. I think the second business aspect to me is for professional services businesses, law firms, accountancy firms, consulting firms, clients, I think in many cases now would be very surprised if we turned up with a team that wasn't diverse and didn't match their team. And so I think there is a real business imperative from that side as well, if somebody wants to get down into the sort of, the fee earning aspects of it. I think unless you reflect your client teams, and I would say that's all aspects of diversity. I mean, in our firm we are putting a lot of effort into making sure we have diversity of entrance from people from less advantaged backgrounds, because it's become more and more difficult for people from less advantaged backgrounds to access firms like ours. So we're putting a lot of effort into that. So diversity in all senses, I think. But the third area, I think it's a wider equation. It's a sort of firm that you want to be, And if you want to be a place that everybody can thrive, everybody respects each other, people want to work there, people want to call it out when they're talking to their friends or their potential clients, then you want to create the right environment. And I think we've done a lot of research on this, but it's common sense really. I think a diverse and inclusive work environment makes a huge difference to performance and the purpose of the organisation. So I think there's that softer but very, very important aspect as well.
And would you agree that responsibility lies on both sides, not only for firms to put forward a diverse panel to represent them, but also on those firms buying the services to demand a diverse panel is presented to them, so that perhaps we both have a responsibility in that regard?
Yes, I agree, and they do. I mean, I think some clients are getting much more prescriptive about what they want from their firms providing services to them, and are quite explicit about it. So absolutely yes, absolutely yes.
So tell me, what do you think that firms ought to do to attract and retain female talent so that they can get to the top?
The tone in the organisation, calling out bad behaviours, promoting diversity and inclusion, and talking about the benefits of that to the organisation and to all the people who are there. Setting that at a macro level, that environment, I think is really important. And and things like when there are whistleblowing issues, or when somebody constantly calls out somebody's name as behaving inappropriately, you deal with it, and you deal with it in a very decisive way. So I think setting the whole tone of the organisation, I think, is really important. I think underneath that, then, I would say it's a whole range of things. So, agility in the workforce, flexibility around, particularly for women in those senior manager years, which is when we are most challenged, when women first have children and they're making decisions. Do they come back to work? Do they come back to work here? Do they come back to work somewhere else? I think talking about that, having open conversations, having great role models who work flexibly but nevertheless have progressed. I think having sponsorship of programs to help women progress and to help women create the networks which somehow happen naturally for most men. They happen naturally for some women. They definitely don't happen naturally for some other women. I think sponsorship's a big thing, and simple things as we were talking about earlier. We just some of the terminology that you use on graduate application forms and how the firm talks about issues. I think, and the terminology it's used internally. I think. Really looking at that and saying, is that really how we want to represent ourselves and how we want to be measured?
It's interesting you talk about language. I've actually heard that there's a service out there that will review your job spec to make it much more gender neutral, because the language has a huge impact on the attractiveness of a role to different people, so depending on how it's been articulated.
Yes, yeah. I get picked up on that the whole time when I send, even as long as I've been around in our firm, when I send messages out around the world to thousands of people, somebody will question sometimes, did I mean to say that in that phrase? And I think that's healthy, actually, because I think there is a bit of the unconscious bias, which I think we all have to admit to, and just checking yourself and letting other people check you openly.
For many firms, they felt they've not made progress in terms of gender, and they say, well, I have policies, I have a gender group, I have action items, and so on and so forth. Do you think that's possibly part of that tiering when it becomes a second level and then you stop to make progress, and it actually needs to be picked up again at the senior level in order to actually drive the momentum going forward? So albeit those initiatives are fantastic, perhaps they end up parking the issue somewhere else as opposed to actually addressing it at the leadership level?
Yeah, I think it needs to be right front and centre of the senior leadership, and it needs to be a KPI that's looked at firm executive meetings, firm board meetings. The executive management of the firms need to be challenged on it. They need to challenge themselves, but they need to they need to lead from the front, and the other senior leaders need to lead from the front as well. It just doesn't work if you delegate the leadership and the doing to the middle management of the firms, actually, because it just gets lost with all the other day-to-day priorities. It's one that takes time and therefore falls down the priority list.
Yes, it's interesting. I've often heard that it's the permafrost.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't use that term, but I know, yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's because, I mean, to be fair to all of those people, thinking in professional services firms, I mean, they're managing client deliverables, they're managing the day-to-day aspects of teams, they're managing, making sure that the teams get paid for the work they do, and making sure things are done right from a regulatory standpoint, all sorts of things. So the list of priorities that they have to face day to day is huge. And so, they have a lot of other things to think about. So you just have to make sure it's up there as one of those with all those other important things.
So diversity is actually a priority for the business.
Yeah.
David, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed our discussion today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.